on an intensely complex issue, ensuring that victims' voices are heard. I've been deeply moved by the testimonies outlined in the latest report, and the victims' bravery in coming forward should not be overlooked. The issuing of the second interim report, specifically on compensation, was not anticipated by the government until we were informed by the inquiry in February this year. However, we very much appreciate and welcome Sir Brian taking this approach. The government is considering intensely the recommendations outlined in this report, and work is underway at pace across all relevant departments to respond fully. My right honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead, announced the Infected Blood inquiry in 2017 to examine the circumstances that led to individuals being given contaminated blood and blood products in the UK. The inquiry, chaired by Sir Brian Langstaff, commenced on the 2nd of July 2018, and I'd like to reiterate our total endorsement for my right honourable friend's point that the contaminated blood scandal of the 70s and 80s should simply never have happened. In tandem with the ongoing inquiry, my right honourable friend, the member for Portsmouth North, as the then Paymaster General, commissioned Sir Robert Francis KC to produce a compensation framework study in anticipation of a recommendation from the inquiry to set up a compensation scheme. The findings of this study were published in June 2022. Shortly after this, Sir Brian published his first interim report of the Infected Blood inquiry in July 2022. In his report, Sir Brian recommended that the government make interim payments to infected individuals and their bereaved partners. The government accepted this recommendation in full on the 17th of August 2022, and interim compensation payments of £100,000 have been paid to those infected individuals and their bereaved partners registered with existing support schemes. As I said to the House in December, we have much to do, and I wish to assure the House that this is a priority for the government and we will continue to progress it. Those are my words in December, and I would like to assure the House that this commitment absolutely remains. Sir Brian's most recent report sets out what the inquiry recommends as an appropriate means of compensating both those infected and affected, and the mechanism for delivering that compensation. In doing so, it sets out the complexity of what is a multi-layered issue. The recommendations in his report outline that those infected and affected should be granted legal support, and infected and affected people and the estates of infected people should be able to claim for categories of loss against 5 awards: Injury Impact Award, Social Impact Award, Autonomy Award, Care Award and Financial Loss Award. This is rather than claiming on individual assessment of each application. In addition, those dissatisfied with their compensation payments should have redress through an appeal to a structure outside of the compensation scheme. The report has also proposed mechanisms Sir Brian thinks would ensure the fairness of the compensation scheme. He has recommended that a scheme is administered by an arm's-length body, chaired by a High Court judge or equivalent, and advised by legal and medical professionals, as well as the beneficiaries of the scheme. In addition to this, Sir Brian has proposed that the route through the courts should still remain open to beneficiaries. Sir Brian has agreed with much of Sir Robert's study, though there are also differences in approach. For example, Sir Robert outlined in his study that the scheme should be delivered locally in each of the 4 nations, as this was the preference of the victims. Sir Brian has recommended that the scheme is delivered by a central body, whilst continuing the support provided by the existing infected blood support schemes, which should be continued and guaranteed for life by legislation or secure government undertaking. There is also divergence in the consideration of scope of those eligible for compensation payments, including the extension of payments to those with hepatitis B and not providing payments to the estates of those affected. Sir Brian's interim report is detailed. It is only right that the government will need to consider the complexities they set out thoroughly when preparing our response. The House will recognise that health is a devolved matter, and I'll be discussing the report with my colleagues in the devolved administrations. As I said at the start of my statement, the government welcomes the publication of the Infected Blood Inquiry's second interim report to assist its ongoing work. However, we do not underestimate the complexity of these recommendations, which do need careful consideration. For example, Sir Brian recommends that an arm's-length body, in which His Majesty's government would have no ongoing role beyond providing taxpayer funds as required by the body. On anything like this scale, this would be a new departure and does have implications for accountability of government, which will need careful consideration alongside how its financial implications will be managed. I would, however, like to reassure the House that while the Government is progressing work to ensure that we are in the best possible position to respond fully at the end of the inquiry, every recommendation by Sir Brian, including in relation to timing and a further interim payment, is receiving intense focus. My colleagues in the Department for Health and Social Care are aware of the issues Sir Brian has raised in relation to psychological support. Under the current psychological support scheme for England, there is provision for a grant of up to £900 a year for established beneficiaries and family members for counselling and talking therapy. The Department for Health and Social Care is undertaking research to look at the psychological support needs so that decisions on commissioning of bespoke service are based on robust evidence and meet the requirement. In closing, I would like to reiterate the need for pace. People die every week as a result of the impact of the scandal. This Government wants to deliver resolution, and we are working at pace across all relevant departments to consider the recommendations as outlined in this latest report and to ensure we are best placed to respond to the inquiry's final report. I commend this statement to the House.